Hi everyone, my name is Lois Skillings and I'm the president of Midcoast Hospital and I'm a nurse, and I'm so excited to be here with you today to read to you a story on behalf of the Community Read Aloud every year that's organized by the United Way of Midcoast, Maine. And I'd love to be there with you in person and hope to again soon. Maybe next year we can be all together in person, but today we're going to do a story by video. And the story I'm going to read to you today is by Robert McCloskey, and it's called Burt Dow, Deep Water Man. Now, Robert McCloskey is such a great author, and he's a Maine author, and he wrote Make Way for Ducklings and Blueberries for Sal. But this story is about Burt Dow, Deep Water Man, because we have so many of you children who live around the water here in Midcoast, Maine, and it's a really fun story if you live by the ocean. So, Burt Dow, Deep Water Man. And you can see here's a picture of him on the front in his yellow oilskin slicker and pants and his hat in this brightly colored boat. And the name of the boat is called the Tidally Idly. Burt Dow is an old deep water man, retired of course, but retired or not, he still keeps two boats. One is a dory so old and so leaky that it can no longer be launched. Burt has painted it red and placed it in the little patch of lawn in front of his house, overlooking the bay. He's rigged it like one of the many ships he's sailed to all the corners of the 7 seas, and it's filled plumb to the gunnels with earth, and every summer Burt plants it with geraniums and Indian peas. The geraniums brighten up the deck, and the Indian peas climb the rigging and sway this away and that away in a smoky sou'wester. So here's the boat that he turned into a flower pot in his front yard. You can see he has chickens around the boat too. So the other boat is an old double-ender named the Tidally Idly with a make and break engine. This boat leaks too, except when it's pulled up on shore for caulking and patching and painting, which is most of the time. She's a good boat, says Burt, patting her on the stern and giving her propeller an affectionate kick. She's got a few tender places in her planking, but you can't see daylight through her nowhere. The Tidally Idly is the pride and joy of Burt's life, and between odd jobs for natives and summer people, he keeps her painted and patched as best he can. Every time he does a paint job, he brings home the leftover paint and uses it on the Tidally Idly. That pink plank, he says, is the color of Ginny Poor's pantry, and the green one is the color of the floor and the doors in Doc Walton's waiting room. And there's the tan porch in trim color from Captain Haskell's house. So he paints the boat with all these odds and ends of paint so it looks all striped. Burt Dow has a sister named Leela who keeps house for him, cooks the lobsters and fish he catches, and clams he digs. She feeds the cock and feeds the hens and tends the garden and helps Burt keep down the weeds in the dory full of geraniums and Indian peas. Leela is a very impatient person, most impatient being on land or sea, says Burt, as he hustles about doing this or that so as not to keep her waiting. Mornings when the cock crows cockily-doodly, Leela is already down in the kitchen rattling her stove lids clinkety-clink and shouting, "Hit the deck, Burt, time to eat," and Burt, winking and blinking his eyelids, comes stumbling down the stairs to breakfast so as not to keep Leela waiting. So here you see Leela, that's his sister, with the broom and the cook stove, and here's Burt Dow eating breakfast, and you should see his eyebrows. They're like the biggest eyebrows you won't ever want to see. Burt Dow has a giggling gull for a pet. Every morning, she roosts on the roof of the shed where Burt keeps his fishing gear. The gull giggles, tee-hee-hee-hee, until Burt comes out and tosses her a pancake or a popover or sometimes a piece of cinnamon toast. So you see Burt's shed here with the lobster trap and the lobster buoys, and here's the giggling gull, and he's feeding the gull some breakfast. When Burt Dow puts out to sea in the Tidally Idly, everybody in town knows it because they hear him pump all the water that has leaked in overnight, slish-kalosh, slish-kalosh. Then there's a pause while Burt checks the tenderest spot between the pink plank, the color of Ginny Poor's pantry, and the green plank, the color of the floor and doors in Doc Walton's waiting room. Then they hear him start the make and break engine, clackety bang, and then they see him, firm hand on the tiller, giggling gull flying along behind, heading out of the cove and going clackety-bankety down the bay. One morning the cock crowed cockily-doodly, and Leela rattled her stove lids clinkety-clink, shouting, "Hit the deck, Burt, time to eat." And Burt came downstairs, winking and blinking his sleepy eyelids, and ate his breakfast. He tossed giggling gull a popover, tee-hee-hee-hee, and went down to the cove to pump the tidily-idly slish-kalosh, shlish-kalosh, and he gently felt the tender spot between the pink plank, the color of Ginny Poor's pantry, and the green plank, the color of the floor and doors in Doc Walton's waiting room. "Giggling gull," he said sadly, "'twon't be long before the tidily-idly gets planted with geraniums and Indian peas." Then he started the make and break, clackety bang, and firm hand on the tiller, giggling gull flying along behind, he headed out of the cove, going clackety-bankety down the bay to fish for cod. Burt kept studying the color of the sky, the color of the water, and the direction of the wind. So you see, here's Burt Dow and the tidily-idly and the giggling gull right following him. "An old deep water man like me always keeps a weather eye out," says Burt, "but he keeps two weather eyes out when he puts out to sea in a vessel as old and leaky as the tidily-idly." It looked like a good day, so Burt took the tidily-idly way out to the end of the bay and into the open sea. He shut off the make and break engine and let the boat drift on the gentle swell. Then he baited up his hook with clams and lowered it over the side to fish for cod. Burt didn't get any bites, not even a teeny-weeny nibble, so he cranked up the make and break and moved the tidily-idly to another spot. But there were no fish there either. He didn't even pull up a pollock or a sculpin. "There must be something down there frightening those fish," Burt confided to the giggling gull. "Tee-hee-hee-hee," the giggling gull agreed. Then, all of a sudden, Burt felt a substantial sort of tug on his line that almost, but not quite, felt and pulled him over the side. And Burt pulled and he tugged and he heaved and he tugged and he grunted and he groaned until the tidily-idly practically stood up on end. You got to see the picture here, the boat. He's pulling on his line as fast as he can, and the boat is almost standing up on end. But he couldn't even haul in a stitch of line. "Must be caught on the bottom," said Burt. "Tee-hee-hee-hee," said the giggling gull, was much amused, and she teetered on the tip of the tiller to see what would happen next. Well, Burt, so it seemed, finally got his line uncaught from the bottom and was hauling it in a moderate sort of way, not paying much attention to see if he needed more bait. The giggling gull was teetering to and fro on the tip of the tiller and tittering tee-hee-hee-hee now and then in a nervous sort of way. She might have noticed something or other that for that particular moment had not come to Burt's attention, but the very next moment it came to Burt's attention that he'd pulled up a whale of a tail. Look at that. Here's Burt in the boat and his line, and look at this big tail of a whale. Or 'twas the other way around. The tail of the whale had pulled up Burt. Burt grabbed the pump handle and hung on while he swung around this away and that away, and the giggling gull teetered on the tip of the tiller and laughed fit to split. Burt finally slacked up on the line, or 'twas the other way around. Finally the tail slacked up on the line, but then the tail began to thrash about this away and that away in such a manner as to call Burt's attention to the fact that there was a whale on the other end of it. Look at that big whale. "Ahoy there, whale," bellowed Burt. "Hold your horses, keep your shirt on, head into the wind, and slack off on the main sheet." The whale couldn't hear because his hearing gear was so far upwind from his steering gear that it had come afoul of Burt's cod hook. "Ahoy there, you giggling gull," shouted Burt. "Fly down there and tell this whale that this vessel has a couple of tender places in her planking, and he's about to stave us in and send the tidily-idly and all hands straight to Davy Jones' locker." The barb of Burt's cod hook was barely caught in the blubber of the tail, and since it didn't hurt, the whale quieted down and allowed Burt to haul in his cod line cautiously so that he could remove the hook. That's a very patient whale right there, being very calm, very patient. When the tail came within reach, Burt had his pliers ready, working ever so carefully as to not tickle. He snipped off the barb and eased out the hook. "There now," said Burt, "only a little bit of a hole, and I've got just the thing for that." He reached down in the bottom of his toolkit and brought out a box of Band-Aids that Doc Walton had given him, just in case a lobster ever took a nip out of a finger. They were decorated with peppermint stripes, and fortunately, they were the kind that would stick to anything, even whale tails. Can you see? You got to see there's a Band-Aid on the tip of the whale tail here. "There's now, Captain Whale," said Burt proudly. "I'll wager your rudder won't leak out any blubber or take aboard any water and get waterlogged now." But just then, ka-smack, a whopping big wave caught the Tidally Idling in an embarrassingly position and jolted her to the bottom of her keel all the way from prow to propeller. Burt had forgotten to keep his weather eye out. What with getting the poor whale out of all the trouble he was in, and he hadn't noticed that it was beginning to blow hard. Tip of the tail snagged on a cod hook, all his blubber about to dribble through the hole. Burt started the make and break engine and managed to head the Tidally Idly into the wind, but he knew he'd never make it home. However, he did make it to the leeward side of the whale, and with a firm hand on the tiller, Giggling Gull flying along behind, headed chuggity-bankety up to the bow of the whale to have a face-to-face talk. "It's blowing a gale of wind, Whale," bellowed Burt, coming right to the point, "and one good turn deserves another. The Tidally Idly's taking aboard water between those two tender planks. I'm a-pumping just as fast as I can pump, but the water's above the floorboard and about to stall the make and break engine. And I'm afeard this vessel and all hands are headed for Davy Jones' locker." "No doubt the Tidally Idly will take terrible," Burt went on, still coming right to the point, "and her barnacled bottom would smart your tongue, Whale. The make and break engine would taste bitter as bile, and me, an old deep water man in oilskins and boots, along with this Giggling Gull, would make a gosh awful trimmings for any meal. But," pleaded Burt, "couldn't you just sort of swallow us? Temporary, of course, while this gale of a wind blows itself off." The whale gave a little snort and didn't say anything. Apparently, this was a whale of few words. He just opened his mouth wide and said, "Ah," in the classic tradition. Burt set the throttle of the make and break at wide open and chug-a-bang, chug-a-bang, firm hand on the tiller, Giggling Gull flying along behind, guided the Tidally Idly right into the whale's mouth and navigated the length of the gullet and into the whale's tummy without so much of touching a tonsil on the way down. He's quite a good boat person. He's a very good captain. Now this page is all black because it's dark inside the whale's tummy. "Well," said Burt, "I naturally expected it to be dark inside a whale's tummy, but I didn't expect it to be as dark as this. A few portholes for light and ventilation would improve the design of this animal." This idea struck the Giggling Gull as funny, and she started giggling again. Burt was bending over and bumbling about in the dark trying to find his lantern, and he bumped his head on the make and break and yelled, "Out of my way, you chuggity-bangity batch of old iron." "Tee-hee-hee," said this made the Giggling Gull laugh fit to split. "Gull," Burt said testily, "someday I'll gaggle you. I never realized until now how limited your vocabulary is. You'd be a poor companion to be shipwrecked on a sunny desert island with, and you're even worse in dry dock, down in this dark, damp tummy of a whale. If I had my choice, I'd take a dictionary every time." Burt had found the lantern and was feeling around trying to find a dry spot on which to strike a match when he had a very disquieting thought. Supposing this whale didn't hear every word I said out there in that gale of wind? He asked, what if he doesn't misunderstand the English language red letter perfect? Or maybe if he's absent-minded, He might not know or remember that we're supposed to be temporary guests, so to speak. Yup, giggling gull, Burt continued, we'll have to make sure we get ourselves unswallowed. He finally struck a match and he used the seat of his pants. Now you can see he's inside the whale's tummy and it's very pink. Well, he said as the light flared up, I naturally expected pink would be the color of this whale's tummy, but I wasn't prepared for pink identical with the pink in Ginny Poor's pantry. Yep, like a big pink cave, that's what this is. Burt checked over his boat and found that the spot where the wave had slapped the tidally idly on her tender bottom would need considerable caulking and patching and painting. In fact, the water that had only moments before had leaked from the ocean into the tidally idly was now leaking the other way around, out of the tidally idly and onto the pink deck of the whale's tummy. After Burt finished his caulking, patching, painting, he said, "'Tain't perfect, but she'll hold till we get home, I suppose." Giggling Gull will have to get busy. Leela's back home rattling her stove lids and getting impatient over our not being home in time to eat dinner. First of all, Burt tugged and shoved until he got the tidally idly turned around so that her bow pointed in the right direction. Then he systematically set about trying to give the whale an upset tummy. Whales have got a strong stomach, Burt explained to the giggling gull, and it takes more than a mixture of ketchup and ice cream, pickles and peppermint, mince pie and mustard to call their attention to the fact that their tummy's upset. He began by pumping out the tidally idly to the very bottom of the bilge. In an old boat, that always produces a lot of interesting things, such as old crab claws and clams and bait and rusty old fish hooks and a can of opener and corroded pieces of brass all mixed in with a nice big helping of sediment. Burt started scooping up the sediment on the end of a piece of shingle and began flipping a little gob here and a little gob there, making a big spatter spots on the lining of the tummy. And the tummy, look at all the spatter spots on the tummy. The tummy began to quiver like a horse's flanks flicking off flies. Then Burt opened a leftover gallon of yellow deck paint and started sloshing it around, dribbling a little bit here, a little bit there. He was beginning to enjoy himself, probably because it was the first time he'd ever have a chance really to express his personality in paint. Next, he took a cup of grease and with the shingle started spattering a few accents here and there, and by now the whale's tummy was all a quiver, and it disturbed Burt's aim a bit, and he misplaced a few gobs of cup grease. Well, the tummy began, look at that inside of this tummy, it's really getting pretty, it does look like a work of art though, to make rumbling noises and flip a lot, this away and that away, and Burt knew right off that it would only take the tiniest little touch to make the tummy break loose from its moorings and get upset. He, as quick as he could, jumped into the tidally idly and started the make and break engine. Chuckity bang, chuckity bang. Giggling gull, he shouted, wiggle your wings and fly up into the forward hatchway and tickle this whale's throat with a feather. Of course, the exhaust and jiggling of the make and break helped, but it was the tickle that turned the trick. With the dark, damped rumble ever heard, the big tummy flipped this way and that away, and then, look at that, out comes the tidally idly. With a wail of a burp, the boat and Burt, firm hand on the tiller, giggling gull flying along behind, make and break engine going wide open, came clackety-bang out of the wide open mouth of the whale, going so fast that they barely touched the tops of the first two waves and landed right dab smack in the middle of a whole school of whales. Burt eased up on the throttle of the make and break and tried to steer a snug course between the two whale tails, one color of Ginny Poor's pantry, the other the color of the floor and doors in Doc Walton's waiting room, but the way was blocked by a whale tail the color of the porch and trim on Captain Haskell's house. Every time Burt shifted course, there seemed to be more whale tails in the way. Finally, Burt stopped the make and break and let the tidally idly drift among the whale tails while he decided what to do next. See all these whales. He bobbed around in his boat, studying the situation. Then he took out his glass and he studied some more. And he finally said, well, that's a whale of a lot of whale tails. making what amounted to the classic understatement. You can hardly see the forest for the trees, Burt complained, or whales for the tails. There must be some reason, thought Burt, why all this school of whales are waving their tails toward the tidally idly. All except one, he added, peeping through his glass at a pale whale that looked exactly as though it had an upset tummy from a bit of bilge water, cup of grease, deck paint, and having its throat tickled by a feather. Yep, that whale looks a little under the weather, but it also looks contented. But meanwhile, the rest of the school of whales seemed to be getting impatient. They twitched the tips of their tails and whacked them down in the water. Careful, bellowed Burt. The tidally idly's got a tender spot. You're apt to spring a leak, and if you don't swat us like a fly, which is no fit way for an old deep water man and his vessel to go down to Davy Jones. What with the tidally idly's regular leaks and all the water being splashed aboard by impatient whale tails, Burt had to keep pumping slish kalosh, and he didn't have much time to wonder what made one whale contented and what made all the rest of them slap happy with their tails. Stronger and younger men might have given up, but not our deep water man Burt Dow. He kept right on pumping with one hand, slish kalosh, while he poked around in his toolbox with another. Still pumping, slish kalosh, he pulled out a Band-Aid, unfurled it from its wrappings between his teeth, and slapped it onto the tip of the nearest whale tail. Burt knew right off his troubles were over. The whales were only impatient at my taking so long to understand them, Burt said to the giggling gull. Whales are very patient about standing or swimming in line to have the tips of their tails decked out with a Band-Aid. They were all sad that one of them had a Band-Aid and the rest of them didn't. So you can see they're all lined up and they're all getting peppermint striped Band-Aids. After all the whale tails had been decorated, each with a peppermint striped Band-Aid, the entire school swam tails held high in a tremendous circle around the tidally idly. An old deep water man like Burt couldn't resist shouting, "Thar she blows," in the best classic tradition, and then all together, 1, 2, 3, the school of whales blew 3 big blows for Burt Dow. You can see all the whales, and they swam off over the horizon. Off they go. I never did see, said Burt, so many tons of contentment come out of such a little Band-Aid box. He still had one Band-Aid left, and he knew he'd never need it himself. Never was a lobster hatched or catched as could ever clamp a claw on Burt Dow. So just for a joke, he said, "Giggling gull, let's take this last Band-Aid home to Leela." "Tee-hee-hee-hee," giggled the gull, because she was always the one who enjoyed Burt's little jokes. "And we'd better take it right now," said Burt, so as not to keep her waiting. And then he noticed that the water was up over the floorboards, so he started pumping again, slish kalosh, and he cranked the make and break engine, clackety bang, with a firm hand on the tiller, giggling gull flying along behind. He headed the tidally idly back up the bay, and they made it home just as the cock began to crow. And that is the end of the story of Burt Dow, Deepwater Man. Thanks for joining with us today. Have fun. Take care. Bye.